Hi everybody and welcome to a new episode of Diagnose Dan. Today we're working on an Audi A6 Quattro biturbo 3-liter V6 TDI diesel, and it's a crank no start. So let's see if we can diagnose this one together. Now this car was towed into my shop by the roadside assistance. The roadside assistance technician told me that the car stalled, lost power and stranded by the side of the road, and then he was called in. He actually tried to fix the car for almost 2 hours by the side of the road. He told me when he came to the car there were fault codes stored for low fuel pressure. He did some measurements, I don't know what, but he believed there was no fuel coming from the tank to the engine, and he did some more measurements and he found that there was no power at the fuse for the low pressure fuel pump. This is what I've been told, but first of all, let's start off by confirming the customer's complaint. Well, as you can hear, that is a crank no start. In the next step, we're gonna do a few things. First of all, I wanna hook up a battery maintainer. The roadside assistance has been working on this car for almost 2 hours by the side of the road. We're gonna read fault codes. We probably need to do some testing, and I don't wanna worry about battery voltage. In the next step, we're going to read fault codes, and hopefully we also got a data pit for fuel pressure. So I've got the battery charger hooked up, I hooked up the dongle to the car, so let's read fault codes. Now unfortunately you can see there are no fault codes stored. Now the roadside technician did tell me that they did clear the fault codes. So at this point we have to take his word for it that there were fault codes for low fuel pressure stored. In the next step, I want to select the fuel pressure data pit. I'm going to crank the car while you guys take a look at that fuel pressure. Now I'm going to crank the car and you guys are going to look at that fuel pressure data pit. But do keep in mind that I only have got a fuel pressure data pit for the high pressure side. Now, if we don't have any low fuel pressure, of course we won't have enough pressure on the high side. Just something to keep in mind. Now, if you paid close attention, you could see that the fuel pressure was low, but there was some fuel pressure. Now remember, we are taking a look at the data pit at the high side of the fuel system. Now when we convert hectopascal to bar, we could see that the engine was expecting 275 to 300 bars to be able to run. We were getting close to 60 bars, which is far too low, but still quite a high pressure. Now, if the low pressure fuel pump wasn't supplying any pressure at all, I wouldn't be expecting almost 60 bars at the high pressure fuel pump. Now to understand what's going on, in the next step, I want to take an actual measurement of the supply pressure of the low pressure fuel pump. I hooked up my pressure sensor to the low pressure supply line, which runs from the low pressure fuel pump to the high pressure fuel pump, which is on the engine, and I hooked it up to my tablet. Now the next step, I'm going to crank the engine over while you guys take a look at the supply pressure. Now as you could see, the supply pressure was well over 5 bars, and that's perfect. Absolutely nothing wrong with our low pressure fuel pump. Now at this point, I'm starting to believe that the technician that worked on the car was set off by the low pressure fuel codes. I think those are meant for the high pressure side and not for the low pressure side. Maybe he went into the wrong direction, measured on the wrong fuse. I don't know, I wasn't there. I just know what he told me. Right now we do know that we've got not enough pressure on the high side, but it's not because of a supply issue on the low side. Now some of you probably already noticed it, but this car isn't cranking right. It's not cranking evenly on all 6 cylinders. Now let me crank it over one more time while you guys pay special attention to the uneven way the engine is cranking over. Doesn't sound right, does it? It sounds like there's something mechanically wrong with this engine. It really sounds like one of the cylinders is really struggling. So at this point, I really want to do a relative compression test, and hopefully that sheds some light on why this engine is cranking so uneven. To do a relative compression test, I need access to the battery, which is underneath a hatch in the back of the vehicle. Now to get access to the hatch, I need to clear out all the stuff from the back of the vehicle. Now let's play a game. What do you think the occupation of the owner of this vehicle is? So I cleared out all the stuff from the back of the vehicle, and it's on the floor of my workshop right now. And I hooked up an amp clamp to the negative battery lead, and I hooked that up to the oscilloscope. So let's crank it over and see what's happening. As you could see, every other 6th hump was higher than the rest. That means that the starter motor needs more force, more amperage to compress one of the cylinders compared to the other 5. Now let's rethink it. We've got good supply pressure, but low high pressure. And we've got a higher cranking current on one of the cylinders. Right now, I've got quite a good idea of where we're going, but to prove my point, I need to disassemble each of the 6 glow plugs. Now I removed all 6 glow plugs from the engine, and I put them here on my workbench. Now if you watch closely, you will see that one of the glow plugs has got a different color compared to the other ones. Can you see how the second one is darker in color than the other 5? Have you already got an idea where we are going? If not, after the next step, you certainly will. I'm going to crank the engine over with the glow plugs removed. You guys take a close look at what happens to that engine while we crank it over. What we just witnessed was diesel blowing out of the glow plug hole of cylinder number 2. What we have got is a stuck open injector on cylinder number 2. Because the injector is stuck open, it's flooding the cylinder and hydrolocking the piston. And that's why we saw the high cranking current on one of the cylinders. And because the injector is stuck open, it's leaking all the pressure into that cylinder, and we're not building pressure in the rest of the system. This is the high pressure fuel line of injector number 2. Right now we're bleeding all that diesel into that cylinder. If we could somehow block this line, the pressure in the rest of the system would rise again and the engine would start and run. Or at least it would run on 5 cylinders, but it would be enough to prove our theory. Let me start off by removing that high pressure fuel line. And after that, I will show you a trick of how to block that fuel line without any special tools. If you take a very tiny screw, which head fits perfectly into the hole in that fuel rail, And if you now reinstall that fuel line will be blocked and no fuel can pass. What I've got to do now is retighten the fuel line, and I disconnected the connector of injector number 2 to get better access to that fuel line. I've got to reinstall all the glow plugs, and after that we can see if this engine starts and runs again on 5 cylinders, that is. Now I reinstalled all the glow plugs, retightened the fuel line, reconnected the connector. If our theory is right, this engine should start and run again. Now that's our diagnosis confirmed. We've got a stock open injector. Now in this video, we're gonna replace one injector. Now I've got the approval of the customer to at least everything that's necessary to get the car running again. After this video, I will suggest to the customer to remove all the injectors or the remaining 5, get them tested and replace them if necessary. This car is also going to need an oil change because some of the diesel will have passed past the piston rings and ended up in the engine oil. But to get this car running again and to show you the fix, in this video we're going to replace one injector. Now replacing the injector is quite straightforward. There is an electrical connector that comes off fairly easy, then there's one bolt holding it down and a return flow line, and there is a high pressure fuel line which we already had off. We've got to remove that again, and then the injector comes straight out. Then we've got to clean the hole and reinstall the replacement injector. Now it's always a good idea to take a picture of the code which is on the new injector before installing it. Now when the injector is installed, the number is very hard to read, but when it's out of the car, make a picture of that number before installing it, because we're going to need that number to code the injector once it's installed. Now I decided to remove the airbox for better accessibility. Now I'm not quite done yet installing the new injector. It's in, but it's not hooked up yet. But before we forget, and before I put on the high pressure line, let's not forget to remove that little screw, or we most certainly will be left with some misfires. Now I've built everything back together, but remember the new injector still needs to be coated. And now the picture we took will be very useful. So let's go into adaption. Let's select injector number 2 correction value. And the old value that was stored was 88AGCWF. So let's input the new value, and the new value is 78. And then we got a Z, a 7 again, B, W, F. Let's hit OK, and let's save. And now the new injector has been coated. So for now we're done. We coated the injector, we installed the new injector. I'm still going to advise the customer to get the other 5 injectors tested and replaced if necessary. I'm going to do an oil and filter change, but for now let's see if the car starts and runs on all 6 cylinders. Now at first start, there was still some air in the system, but at the second start, it was running perfectly on all 6 cylinders. Now I'm still going to do the oil change. I'm gonna call the customer and I'm gonna advise him to get the other 5 injectors tested, and we'll see if he approves. Now, if you got fault code stored for low fuel pressure on a common rail diesel, remember you've got a low side and a high side, and both can have an effect on each other. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and if you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, diagnose then, fixed it again. See you next time, guys.